Hey, ugly. Your kid looks like a defective version of her mom.
After 13 years, my ex-husband, David, said these words after scrutinizing my daughter, Nancy, who was in a wheelchair pushed by me. I was about to retort with some foul language.
Any problem with my daughter?
It was my current husband, Kevin, who spoke from behind me. His deep baritone voice resonated clearly enough to make not only me but everyone around turn involuntarily. Yet, I sensed a mocking undertone in his voice, which perhaps only I, his wife, noticed. Looking back at David again, I saw his face had turned pale blue for some reason. My name is Rachel, 35 years old. I'm a homemaker living with my 3-year-old daughter, Nancy, and my husband, Kevin, who is 3 years younger. The house we currently live in originally belonged to Kevin's parents. After we married, Kevin's grandmother passed away suddenly. Unable to leave his elderly grandfather alone, Kevin's parents gave us their house and moved into Kevin's grandfather's house. However, the reason seemed to be that, besides caring for his grandfather, Kevin, who had just become independent around that time, was probably concerned about his finances. They arranged for us to live rent-free in his parents' house. I think that was a significant factor for us. I was particularly grateful for the kindness of my in-laws, so much so that until I became pregnant with Nancy, I visited Kevin's grandfather's house every other day and willingly helped with medical appointments, transportation, and housework. When Nancy was born, I slowed down a bit, but we still visited Kevin's grandfather once a month. During those visits, we helped out as much as we could and let Kevin's parents take a break by going to a day spa.
Thank you so much for everything you do, especially when you're busy raising a child.
She's right. Kevin really married a wonderful person.
My in-laws always expressed their gratitude, but I felt I could never repay them enough for all they've done for us, including Kevin's twin sister, Laura. They've saved my life twice. Actually, Kevin was on his first marriage, but I was married before and it ended in failure. I met my first husband, David, when we both moved into the same apartment after getting into college. We became friends as we unpacked and shared tips about the best local grocery stores, hardware stores, and affordable restaurants. David attended a prestigious private university known for its stylish campus and frequently featured in the media, unlike my practical college. David himself was tall and handsome.
At my university, we have a lot of students who have entered through the affiliated high school via an upward escalator. As a guy from the countryside, I feel a bit out of place. But you're like me, Rachel. It's easier to be myself around you.
David started spending more time at my place, and soon we were practically living together. I couldn't believe I was dating such a good-looking guy. I may not be as glamorous as the girls on David's campus, but I can be the comforting presence he needs. I was thrilled and happily took care of all the cooking, cleaning, and laundry like a housekeeper. In hindsight, it was pretty foolish. A guy who says it's easier to be with you right after you start dating is not a good guy. That easier simply meant it's easier for me. But as they say, love is blind. I ignored David's selfishness.
I want to quit my part-time job because it's tough, but I can't because my allowance from parents is low. My classes are getting harder too.
When he told that, I suggested, why don't we move into a slightly larger apartment instead of 2 separate rooms? I'll cover the rent, so don't worry. I offered to move to a newly built apartment near the place where we first met, and to cover the entire rent myself. David agreed quickly, but insisted on having 2 phone lines in our new place. When I expressed concern, he said,
My dad got transferred to Brazil when I started high school, and my mom went with him. They're strict, and if they find out we're living together, they might stop my allowance or even make me quit school. You wouldn't want that, would you? And your parents wouldn't be happy to know we're living together either, even though we're going to get married someday.
David, who was unusually serious, told me, but I was so focused on the "we're going to get married someday" part of his speech that I didn't think much about the rest. Moving in together meant I took on a significant financial burden. The apartment lease was in my name, so all the bills, including rent, utilities, phone, and internet, came out of my account. Initially, David said, "You're covering the rent, so I'll contribute more to the utilities." But he soon started saying,
Sorry, Rachel. I'm broke again because of socializing. I can't refuse when classmates invite me out for drinks, especially with discussions for the job hunting coming up.
Eventually, I was covering all the expenses, including groceries and even David's beer. The only thing David paid for was the occasional pizza when his friends visited. David would also say, "I haven't told my friends about you because they tease me for living with someone. So can you leave the apartment when they come over?" I had no friends to confide in or seek support from, so I spent those nights in cafes or diners. It was tough in the summer, but worse in winter. One morning, I was so broke that I waited on a park swing until I could go home. I cried, wondering what I was doing with my life. In our senior year, David and I started job hunting. I finally confronted him. "You need to contribute to our expenses. You're acting like a parasite." Then he instantly switched to a babying tone.
I'm sorry, Rachel. I was just being dependent on you. Please don't be mad.
David immediately became apologetic. The next day, David unusually came to pick me up from work. When we got back, the apartment was clean, and he had prepared a dinner from an upscale supermarket, complete with flowers, wine, and a cake. In our long relationship, this was the first time David had shown such thoughtfulness, and he topped it off by giving me a ring from a popular casual brand.
I can't afford much now, but someday I'll buy you a diamond worth 3 months' salary.
When he put that ring on my finger, I remember saying something like, "This is the happiest moment of my life," but that happy memory was the only one.
I'm torn between getting a job or studying abroad. But if I stay like this, I'll just keep relying on you, Rachel. This is an important crossroads in my life, and I need to try handling it on my own for a while.
He said this and abruptly left, saying he would share an apartment with friends. Though I felt anxious, he left some of his belongings and contacted me twice a day by email or phone. I need to focus on my job search too. I shifted my mindset and managed to get a job offer from my top choice mid-sized trading company. But around that time, strange calls started coming to the landline in David's name. Listening to the voicemail, I heard things like, "You need to repay this week and don't take us lightly." I was shocked. I hurriedly contacted David on his cell, but he just said, "Don't worry about it." Then letters marked final notice and demand for payment started arriving in our mailbox. When I pressed him about it, he snapped.
I've put up with an ugly, defective person like you this whole time, so you should pay us thanks.
After that, he stopped answering my calls. I realized then that I had never asked for his new address. The university wouldn't give me any information, citing privacy. Desperate, I opened the boxes David had left behind, hoping for a clue. Inside, I found documents suggesting debts from various financial companies, old clothes, and a worn-out laptop. There were no clues about his parents' address in Brazil or where he currently lived. I realized I had been nothing but a cash cow for David, but things got worse. Shortly after losing contact with David, 2 men in suits showed up at my apartment, claiming I was David's wife and his guarantor for his debts, and demanded immediate repayment. This additional blow, on top of being abandoned by David, was devastating. Kevin and his family, who later became my husband, saved me from this ordeal. That's why I want to do whatever I can for my in-laws and husband. But while pushing our daughter Nancy's wheelchair through the mall, I unexpectedly ran into David, the man who had betrayed and abandoned me 13 years ago. He noticed me staring in disbelief and approached with a nasty smile after scrutinizing me and my daughter.
Hey, ugly. Your kid looks like a defective version of her mom.
He greeted me with these words. I was enraged that he insulted not only me but also my daughter. Just then, someone stepped between us. It was my husband, Kevin.
Is there a problem with my daughter?
Kevin's clear voice made passers-by stop and look, but for some reason, David's face turned pale, and he didn't retort. Wondering why, Nancy and I looked between David and Kevin, unable to bear the attention.
This is a private matter. It has nothing to do with you.
David barked at Kevin, but Kevin, unfazed, replied,
It has everything to do with me. Otherwise, I wouldn't waste my breath on someone like you.
He sneered.
Nancy, Mom and Dad have to attend to something for a bit. Your aunt will be here soon to pick you up. Can you go with her for now?
He smiled at Nancy. Hearing this, I couldn't help but exclaim, "What?" But Nancy, unusually composed for her age, was not easily surprised.
All right, it's a celebration, so come back soon.
With that, she left with Kevin's sister Laura and her kids, who had arrived shortly. Kevin then turned to David, who had lost his initial bravado.
Let's have an adult conversation. We can't put on a free show for everyone here, so let's move.
Kevin bent slightly and spoke with a half smile, applying pressure. Though David wasn't short, standing at nearly 6 feet inches, Kevin's unsmiling eyes bore down on him. He probably thought it was better than being stared at curiously by those around us. David surprisingly agreed fairly readily to Kevin's suggestion and agreed to change locations. The three of us got into a taxi and arrived at the building where Kevin's office was located. David's face paled again when he saw that Kevin was heading to a law office, as indicated by the elevator button Kevin pressed and the tenant directory. With no way to escape, David joined us in the elevator. Although Kevin was supposed to be off today, the staff were surprised to see him arrive with a stern face, accompanied by his wife and a guest. By the time we were shown to the back conference room, everyone had calmed down. Looking at Kevin's profile helped me steady my own nerves. David, on the other hand, was visibly restless. Seeing this, Kevin smirked and placed a stack of documents brought by the staff next to him.
It's quite frightening how coincidences work. I was just about to show this investigation report to the chairman, and now, here I am meeting the subject in person.
Kevin mentioned it casually. David's face grew even paler at these words, but I had no idea what Kevin was talking about. Noticing my confusion, Kevin began explaining to both of us. The chairman mentioned earlier was the current chairman of a major machine tool manufacturer, a major client of Kevin's office. The chairman had recently summoned Kevin for a private meeting. At the company's headquarters, Kevin was introduced to the chairman's youngest daughter, who had just returned from New York graduating from university. She requested Kevin's discreet investigation of a man.
When I was introduced to the sales department, there you were, David Smith, though you introduced yourself as Dave, modified differently.
Kevin continued with a grin, while David's face turned even paler. According to Kevin, the chairman's granddaughter had fallen for a British man she met while studying at the same university in New York. This man had dropped out of a British university just before graduating, moved to America, and enrolled in a local university. After graduation, he worked locally but soon pursued graduate studies. The chairman's granddaughter, a smart woman, fell deeply in love with the man who supported her through the culture shock and homesickness period after she entered a university in New York. The chairman had no knowledge of a man like David being around his granddaughter in New York. However, his daughter, the company's executive director, had met the man during her business trips to New York and was introduced to his parents. Though she thought it was unnecessary to meddle in her adult daughter's affairs, she found the sudden request for marriage and a future executive role too abrupt. Thus, the chairman and the executive director privately decided to have Kevin's law office, who has been with them since their great-grandfather's time, investigate David. Hearing all this, I had a bad feeling. "Don't tell me that man is David?" I asked Kevin, glaring at David in front of me.
What's the problem if it is? We broke up long ago. Who I marry now is none of your business.
David snapped before Kevin could respond. Indeed, David was just a bad memory, and I had no interest in him anymore, but I had plenty of grudges to air. We broke up, yes. But you filed the marriage certificate without my consent, made me a guarantor for your debts, and then ran off. David looked momentarily taken aback by my shouting, but soon smirked again.
That's easy for you to say. But you wanted to marry me back then too. I just helped you fulfill that dream and asked you to help with my debt repayment in return.
He gestured towards Kevin with his chin.
When I renewed my passport over there, I didn't need a family register, so I didn't know. But when I got back here and checked, I was relieved to find out I was single. I never thought someone would want to marry an ugly, defective woman like you. I was worried you might be waiting for my return.
He brought up something like that. Hearing this condescending speech made me furious again, but Kevin stepped in to calm me down.
I thought you might have reflected a bit since you were quiet earlier. but trash will always be trash.
Kevin then smoothly explained why David's marriage to me had been annulled, leaving David single. When David disappeared and debt collectors came after me, it was Kevin's father who first offered me help. I had been tutoring Kevin's twin sister, Laura, as a part-time job, and now she was my sister-in-law. Laura was a bright girl, but had been ostracized by her classmates and was frequently absent from school. Hired by her worried parents, I learned that she was being bullied for defending another ostracized friend. So I not only tutored her, but also listened to her problems and tried to encourage her. Her parents and grandparents grew fond of me and treated me like family. When debt collectors came to my apartment, Laura had just been accepted into her desired university and came to share the news with her mother. Shocked to see how much I had deteriorated in a short time, they were furious to learn that David had filed a marriage certificate without my consent and made me a guarantor for his debts. They immediately contacted Kevin's father and grandfather, who brought me to this law office.
From there, my father and grandfather put all their efforts into resolving the issue. They initiated mediation to annul the unauthorized marriage and negotiated with the financial institutions to nullify the unauthorized guarantor agreements. It was tough, but both my father and grandfather are known for being skilled in this industry. Eventually, we succeeded in both cases.
In reality, suing David, whose whereabouts were unknown, to annul the marriage and negotiating with tricky financial institutions must have been a huge effort. Meanwhile, overwhelmed by the sudden disaster, shocked by David's abandonment, and the ensuing chaos, I barely graduated from university and lost my job offer. When I was worried about how I would pay the legal fees, Kevin's father offered me a job at their firm. I worked diligently, hoping to repay their kindness. I tried to pay the legal fees in installments from my salary, but they only accepted a small amount, just enough to cover expenses, to avoid trouble with the bar association. Thanks to their efforts, the marriage was annulled, and I was released from being David's guarantor.
So, strictly speaking, you're not Rachel's ex-husband. You're just a blot on her life.
David still didn't seem to grasp the seriousness of the situation.
Well, having a marriage history with someone like her isn't worth much anyway. Besides, the debt should be expired by now, so it doesn't matter.
He sneered. At that moment, Kevin burst out laughing.
The statute of limitations hasn't expired. Debt collectors will likely come after you next week.
Kevin said, facing David, who looked bewildered. David might have thought that the 13 years had made the debt null and void. But thanks to Kevin's father and grandfather, I was released from being the guarantor. And the financial institutions, unable to find David, had sold his debt to a collection agency. In cases like David's, where borrowers try to escape their debt or fall behind on payments, financial institutions often sell these non-performing loans to debt collection agencies. This process, known as debt assignment, transfers the responsibility for debt collection to these agencies, which specialize in recovering outstanding debts. While they no longer resort to illegal methods as they might have in the past, these debt collectors are well versed in the law and will use every legal means available to recover the debt. Naturally, the debt collection agency that purchased David's debt is no exception. As a result of the legal proceedings initiated by the agency, the statute of limitations has been extended by another 10 years from the court's ruling, making it currently fully enforceable. Additionally, the accumulated interest and legal fees had inflated the total amount owed to several times the original debt. Hearing this, David's face darkened for a moment.
That small amount of money won't be a problem once I get a job at that company as the chairman's son-in-law.
He became defiant. That's typical of shallow David. Despite the miscalculation, he probably thought that if he could marry into the family and become an executive at his father-in-law's company, repaying the debt would be easy.
Do you remember what I said earlier? Who hired me to investigate you?
Kevin said, making David's face turn pale. Kevin is Laura's twin brother, but when I tutored Laura, we barely spoke, just greeted each other. However, Kevin became interested in me because Laura adored me and praised me like a sister. Later, unexpectedly working at the same office, Kevin and I, who had passed the preliminary bar exam in college and became a lawyer on the fast track, started working together. When Kevin asked me to date him with marriage in mind, I explained my past and declined, feeling guilty towards his father and grandfather. But Kevin said he had known about everything with David for a long time and still wanted to marry me. His parents, grandparents, and Laura all supported him. By then, my parents, who knew everything and were worried about my future, also gave their blessing, and Kevin and I happily married. Unlike me, who wanted to seal off my past as a Black history, Kevin had long harbored a desire for revenge against David. So when the chairman's request came, Kevin initially thought it was a coincidence, but upon investigation, confirmed that David Smith, the chairman's daughter's boyfriend, was indeed the same David Smith who had discarded me like garbage. He had just finished compiling the report to submit at the beginning of the week.
You got away somehow over there, but not here. When the chairman's granddaughter saw your driver's license and pointed out the different spelling, you said it was because this way was luckier, but it was actually to cover your tracks, right? After all, Smith is the most common surname in the US. You probably thought you could pass off any trouble as someone else with the same name.
Kevin sternly warned David not to think such shallow tricks would work against a lawyer. Kevin revealed that he had already scanned the report and mailed it to the chairman and his granddaughter. He added,
Since then, occasionally, we've been receiving inquiries from that financial institution about your whereabouts at the office. We've also informed the debt collection agency about you.
As Kevin laughed wholeheartedly, David collapsed to his knees and started begging
Please try to convince the chairman and his granddaughter that it was a mistake.
and crying. But Kevin, with a cold smile, said,
Why should I, as a lawyer, have to tell such blatant lies to a client, something that's completely unethical? Even why would I do that for someone who hurled insults, calling my young daughter, who's in a wheelchair due to an injury, ugly and defective, especially when I owe them no favors?
So he added, Nancy was injured on the way to her beloved violin lessons when a high school student, looking at their phone, bumped into her, causing her to fall. Concerned for Nancy, who had become depressed since then, Laura and her kids decided to celebrate when Nancy won an award in a drawing contest. We had gone out to celebrate, only to run into David, bringing this misfortune. Kevin, who adored Nancy, must have been furious, not just about David's past, but also his recent insults to Nancy. Even when Kevin dismissed him coldly, David shamelessly continued to cry loudly, begging, Please, my whole future depends on this. Are you going to ruin my life?
Ruin your life? What nerve you have! What you tried to do to Rachel and the chairman's granddaughter was exactly that, ruining their lives. Those who curse others dig two graves. This is your karma, hitting you like a boomerang.
With that, Kevin pushed David away.
That way, please.
He called the building security to escort David out of the office. As David's cries and curses faded, Kevin and I exchanged a smile. Later, David tried to explain himself to the chairman's granddaughter, but since she had already been suspicious of him, the truth only fueled her anger, and she told him she never wanted to see him again. But that wasn't the end. The chairman and his daughter, enraged at the harm done to their beloved, went further. When David stalked her and bombarded her with messages and emails, they reported him to the police for attempting to marry and enter the company with a false background. Although it wasn't prosecuted, David received a warning for stalking. Even then, he didn't give up and repeated the stalking multiple times, leading to his arrest and indictment. Though he was given a suspended sentence, he still ended up with a prison term. After being released on bail, he tried to resume his normal life. However, with a criminal record, he couldn't find a job anywhere. Desperate, David planned to go back to Brazil for a job, but the criminal record prevented him from getting a visa, forcing him to abandon that plan. When his parents learned everything from the chairman and the police, they disowned him. With no one to turn to, David ended up completely alone. Meanwhile, his debt repayment was pressing. Desperately seeking part-time work, he found himself blacklisted, unable to own a smartphone or renew his expired driver's license, leaving him without any ID or stable address. Through the grapevine, I heard that he took on dubious jobs referred by debt collectors, living in a dorm with no privacy, working from morning till night. But that has nothing to do with me, so I decided to forget it as soon as I heard it. Meanwhile, Kevin and I moved from our suburban house to an apartment near the private elementary school Nancy plans to attend, as her injury healed. Since the incident, Nancy disliked taking the train, so she was happy to take the bus and enjoyed the view from her room on a high floor. When Kevin suggested selling the remodeled family home and moving to the apartment, I worried about what my in-laws would think. However, Kevin's parents, enjoying their second life in a warm seaside town after giving us the family home, encouraged us.
Our son, his wife, and our granddaughter come first, so don't hesitate.
Kevin also enjoys the new life, saying,
My workplace is closer, and I have more time with the family. I'm glad we made the move.
seeing Kevin and Nancy so happy. I'm thinking of trying something new myself,